Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our tax system is rigged in favor of wealthy individuals and giant corporations that can use lawyers and accountants and lobbyists to avoid paying their fair share in taxes. One problem is the tax code that shields the wealthy and the wealth of ultra millionaires. And I've proposed solutions like a wealth tax to be able to fix that. But the tax code is only part of the problem. Right now, we're not actually enforcing the laws on the books and catching people who fail to pay what they already owe, particularly the ultra rich. The top 1% of Americans account for more than a third of all unpaid federal income tax. And this adds up. Over the next decade, IRS will fail to collect an estimated $7.5 trillion in taxes owed. That's money we're leaving on the table under current law, money that could be invested in childcare, education, a whole bunch of other priorities. So let me ask you, Commissioner Rettig, one of the best tools the IRS has to ensure that people are paying their taxes is to audit them, check their numbers, force them to pay up if they're cheating. But since 2010, audit rates have fallen nearly 60% overall, and they've fallen nearly 80% for taxpayers with more than $10 million in income. Why has the audit rate fallen most sharply for the richest taxpayers?
In the last decade, our enforcement personnel, we've lost 17,000 enforcement personnel. So we have 17,000 fewer people to do exactly what you're asking. And the point is, we actually have 6,500. That's our population that go after the high income taxpayers, the most egregious cases in the corporate world. So if you were to add 17,000 to 6,500, I think you'd see a reversal in those numbers. We're very hopeful. We feel some momentum, bipartisan momentum for our support if we manage our operations effectively, but also there's amounts that we can absorb, and we could probably absorb 5,000 to 7,000 per year. We're ramping up our human capital office, but I think it's what people deserve for us to be effective.
Let's not forget, Republicans deliberately targeted the IRS with budget cuts, which depleted its ability to enforce our tax laws. So even as the wealthy and corporations engineer increasingly creative tricks to game the system, the IRS is forced to play catch up with an enforcement staff that's now 30% smaller than it was 10 years ago, and a technology system that is built on computer programming that's nearly 60 years old. It's clear we need a bold investment in the IRS, which President Biden has called for in his infrastructure plan. And Chair Wyden has been a champion for more enforcement funding for years. But the solution isn't just more funding. It's about more stable funding that's targeted toward catching the biggest fish, and that's protected from lobbyists that try to chip away at that funding. Most of the IRS's funding is discretionary, meaning that Congress decides every year how much the agency should get. But this leaves the IRS budget unpredictable and vulnerable to cuts. By contrast, mandatory funding would provide funding on an ongoing basis, ensuring that the IRS has a stream of funds that's steady, that's predictable, that's sustained. Congress has provided this kind of funding for important purposes like preventing fraud in Medicare and Medicaid. So let me ask you, Commissioner Rettig, would additional mandatory funding on top of what the IRS gets through the annual appropriations process, would that kind of mandatory funding strengthen the IRS's ability to go after wealthy tax cheats?
Absolutely. Mandatory, consistent, adequate multi-year funding allows us to plan appropriately. Every time we go into hiring, we have a concern whether we can actually feed those folks the next year.
Well, I'm glad to hear that this would be helpful because I'm working on legislation to do exactly that. And since one of the biggest ways that the wealthy and that corporations hide their income and avoid paying taxes is by claiming they have much less income than they really do, this legislation would also require more third-party verification of the reported numbers, the same way that wages and interest are already reported to the IRS for the rest of us. Rebuilding the IRS is about making sure that we have a playing field that is level and making sure that we have a government that works for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Rettig, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. I know we're going to be working closely together on these issues. So